Who did you vote for in the last general election?
I voted for the Labour Party. I've voted for them since I was able to vote. I think part of the historical link with Labour, certainly when I got into politics, it was looking for a party that sort of shared my particular values, and Labour Party, when I was reading up their manifesto, was much more aligned to sort of the values I shared with them. So it was the Labour Party that I voted for.
I agree with the same reason. I've also voted Labour, and for the same reason you've said. In all fairness, I will say that whilst I voted this year, it's not because I believe that Labour was going to be doing anything for me. I think that things have changed and so forth. However, I felt that it's my right to vote as a black woman. We have fought long and hard for that right, and I wanted to. So this year, I did vote. Now, in terms of what I wanted Labour to do for me, I meant that, okay, basically, they all sell a story, and the story is not factual. So they're all the same. They tell us what we want to hear. And basically, because historically I've always voted Labour, I did that for that sense. I would not have changed for that reason.
I voted Labour because I still think there's a big difference between the Labour and Conservative Party. You know, the values the Labour Party have is one I aspire to, and their philosophy always one that I aspire to. You said you don't think Labour can do anything for you, but Labour still is a party that tell me that they care about the elderly, the poor people. You know what I mean? I come from a working class, and as a black person coming to this country, I feel that Labour answers some of the question of equality much better than the Conservative in that respect. I think one of the reasons why the demise of the Labour in such a short time since Ed Miliband took over was a set of circumstances, unfortunate for him. But Labour Party still, I can still see the Labour philosophy and the ideology of one for the working class people, and one that will and always, I believe, continue. So, yes, you do hope so. But the Conservative, we're not talking about policies here. You know what I mean? Because the Conservative have some good policy, and we can see why so many people voted for the Conservative. But deep down, you can tell, as a black person, you can tell that Labour, the values that they have and portray is the one that I still aspire to.
I feel slightly embarrassed, actually, to even say that I did vote Conservative, because probably I think that I'm supposed to vote Labour. But no, I think I was better off voting Conservative. As a landlord, I think Conservative will look after me better. I think that many of my tenants who are DSS are given too much. I can understand why the policies that have been put in place have been done so. I think there was too many people, some of my tenants are too often doing nothing. And I feel that people should be encouraged to go to work, and I believe that Conservative are more inclined to encourage people to work.
You may be right partly on that, but what I find that is it's gone that way too much, because I'm from a mental health background, and when you see clients that are coming in that are experiencing mental health and they're clearly trying to push them back into work, then we have to question, are they doing the right thing? Because by doing so, it's making people worse off. And I understand what you're saying, that there are some people who clearly have got into the system, are using the system, and need to be, sidetracked and be pushed in the right way of going back to work. But my concern is about, people who are clearly ill and need to be looked after, rather than pushing them back into work, and then they end up in the top end of being ill.
I do think it's a myth. I think that the BME voters would always vote for Labour. I mean, we are moving on, you know what I mean? This black people in this country, this is around the fourth generation now, you know what I mean? We are much more educated, you know what I mean? And the trend with young voters is they know how to take care of themselves. I think they can understand with the social media and so forth. They can pick up trend, and they understand what's going on. So I don't think the Labour Party can continue to depend on black voters as a sure hit. You know, I think younger voters are looking for themselves. I think some of the Conservative policies is in line with their thinking. I mean, as you said there before, the Conservative bringing policy where if you work hard, they'll take care of you. You know what I mean? And that is good. You know what I mean? The Conservative seem to be better at the economy. You know what I mean? And I think the little Labour themselves have done this unto themselves. You know what I mean? I don't think they have sell themselves properly as somebody as a young person who is aspirational, who want to own their own house and stuff. Labour's still stuck in that idea that we'll take care of you, irrespective, as you alluded to earlier, about your tenants. Your tenants have all this free money to pay their rent. You know what I mean? I don't think that's what young people want either.
The voters are now more sophisticated. I agree with that. But what I don't agree with is that we are so separated from each other that we're voting individually. And I think that as black and minority ethnic communities, we still have a sense of togetherness, we still have a sense of purpose that links us, and that's why we would vote Labour. That's why it's anathema to be voting Conservative. That's why it's difficult for people to grasp the idea that I am by myself in this. It's when I was listening to you, I thought, oh, I don't think that. And I thought, well, what's that about? And I think it's because now that I'm an adult and I lived through the 70s and 80s where black people were catching hell, it's my responsibility to ensure that there's something for my children to carry on and take forward. The idea that, you know, Labour only works for or is only good for people who want to be on the dole was never true. No. Never true. That was always the scare story that was put forward by the media, so that people who've got a house think that they've got an affinity with a millionaire who's got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 houses. That affinity doesn't really exist.
You see, whilst people might think that we are voting as a group, I'm not too sure if we really are. If we looked at the how everybody thought it was going to be such a close fight, but yet when it came to it, Conservative won by a massive landslide. It says to me that people were planning in their heart that I'm going to vote Conservative, but I'm not going to let anybody know. So, you know, I didn't want to tell everybody I was going to vote Conservative, but I knew that, or for me, Conservative was going to be do more for me and my family than Labour, and that's why I voted for that.
If you go back to Smethwick, and if you remember what happened around that, even Malcolm X came to Smethwick because it got that bad. And I think for many years, people obviously saw the Tory party as this racist party because, you know, when they were writing things on the walls like, if you want a N-word for a neighbour, then vote Labour. So I think a lot of these stereotypes stuck in people's heads for many, many years. But what we're saying now is we've entered into a time where those barriers are now being broken down. So people now are thinking, okay then, I like what the Conservatives are saying, no longer seeing them as a racist party, because Sadiq Khan, could have been sometime last year, was raising arguments against the Conservative Party in Parliament, saying to them, look, the same old racist Tory party again. But I sat there and I thought, no, Sadiq, well, you now sound like you're a bit of an idiot because they've not mentioned anything, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of discrimination. Nothing they've said discriminated against. I don't feel that they discriminated against me. And myself as a Labour Party, strong Labour Party member, vote for Labour. I kind of even, in the last election, saw myself as kind of like a red Tory, which sounds really weird because a lot of what the Tories were saying made a lot more sense than what Ed Miliband was saying. It is a case of them, we as we could say, as sitting around the table now, we're from the African Caribbean community. So we as the African Caribbean community have had over 40 years now to integrate. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, as time moves on, our children will integrate even more. So even if Leicester is a predominantly Labour city now, within the next 10 years or even 20 years, it might start to break up because people might start thinking, hold on a minute, we need to challenge our local council. We need to challenge our local Labour MPs because they're not delivering anymore. I don't feel that they're standing there talking for me.
I think that presupposes that there is a vote to win back. And I think that as Caribbean Africans and minority ethnic communities, we're more politically sophisticated than that. But I do think that historically, because as Caribbean Africans we have voted Labour, there's been an expectation in the party that we will continue to do so. And a kind of embarrassment in the party when we talk about race, to say, well, we have particular needs, because there's been an expectation that you're going to vote Labour anyway, no matter what we do. Yeah. I think to if there is a vote to win back, it's that the party needs to connect more with the lives that people are actually living. Not the stuff about aspiration is fantastic. I think that's brilliant. But how do we move? And this is why it has to be Labour. How do we move from aspiration to actuality? Because we're not getting it with the Conservatives.
Already, I campaign a lot against this certain term used as BME, because then you can break down BME itself, can't you, into its different categories, and we're all different within BME. So you can't just specifically say the BME community, because in that case, then you have to go out there and speak to the entire BME community, and it's so. I think even the Irish and the Scottish are thrown in there. Do you know what I mean? So, are we going to say that the BME community's African Caribbean, African, Somali, do you know what I mean? Bangladeshi. So, it's quite complicated now.
Recognising that, BME means different things to different people at different times, so it's not just one thing. And you've broken it down saying Somali, African, Polish, Irish. So what would Labour, if we accept that Labour has lost the vote in the first place, which I don't, but what would Labour need to do to appeal to those particular voters?
I think
not doing
well,
now.
that's a good question, and I think I've got the perfect answer. Start focusing on BME and just go out there and see if you can get the vote. Obviously, Conservatives are going out there. They're not particularly targeting one particular group, even though some people would say you were targeting the rich.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
How do they do that? How would Labour do that without talking specifically about race? And Labour has historically been a bit embarrassed to say race.
I personally think that they can do it, and Shaka is right in what he's saying about they sort of lump everybody together as BME. And for me, to win back that vote, they need to recognise, in particular here in Leicester, that there's BME within a BME. And it's about looking at those individual groups' needs and addressing it appropriately. My needs is different. Even us here as black people, as African Caribbean people, my needs are different to yours. So when you have Leicester as diverse as it is, and you're going to lump everybody and just address it, then it's not going to happen. I would love to see the politicians come out to people. Don't just wait until it's election time that we start seeing your face. Come out to, for example, the West Indian Senior Citizens Project. See what the older people are doing there. See what their needs are. Go to the Asian communities, a group there, see what their needs are, and start to see their faces in the community, dealing with people as people, and see what the needs are, rather than just lumping people together.
What utterly doesn't help, though, is that as a Labour Party in government in Leicester, we have to administer the cuts. And so despite the fact that we would want to do all things for all people and support aspiration, what we've been told to do is government directive. We have to do the cuts. And so it looks like Labour is losing the vote, Labour is losing the argument, but really we've lost the support that national government would ordinarily give us. So
and I think that comes back to the whole issue about us looking at politics with that small p and that big P, because some of the points that you've just raised, Pam, in relation to the Labour Party coming out, and I agree in terms of being specific with communities, because that term is just too broad in terms of BME. And so there has to be some targeting and not this assumption, right, we're going to get the African Caribbean vote. There has to be, and again, I admit, I went to, when the elections were taken back, I actually went to Belgrave and I met Ed Miliband. And one of the things that I looked around and I was saying, well, how do our community get involved in politics with that small p and the big P? Because you can't just go and see then the general election and just go, oh, well, it's just that one time I'm voting. What are the policies? We've just talked about values. What is, when we're reading through their election manifestos, what is it that appeals to us? And that's the deeper sense that we've got to get involved. Sometimes
I also think that BME in politics is very dangerous, because for me, BME is a failure for, as far as I'm concerned, this society or this government to get, racism back in the 70s and 80s right. So they had to come up with this label, which as far as I'm concerned, kind of like stigmatizes the community in terms of if equality went the way we all expected it to, I would just be accepted as Shaka. You would not need to know my ethnicity or where I was born. You'd know who I am. But the fact that I have to tick a box on a sheet of paper,
That's an interesting idea. However, in that, because I am a little bit older than you, but not a great. No, I'm feeling that. But in the 70s and 80s and 90s, in fact, when there was absolutely no recording of who you are any different, there was a leaking. So people were appointed in the image of the people who were appointed, and so you wouldn't get in. The houses were allocated in the image of the people who were allocating the housing, so you wouldn't get in, and there was no scope to say, what about me? So the fact that we now have to tick, the fact that we are having to collect statistics, whether those statistics are useful or not, I think is actually progress. The indictment is that in 2016, where we are still having to collect, because we still haven't got it right. But that doesn't mean do away with it. That doesn't mean call everybody BME and expect them to vote for you. It doesn't mean that.
I think it's very important that we are fully representative. And to be honest, the only time I think I would come back to Labour is if I saw a black face leading in some position. At the moment, the person, and this is very shallow, the person who's leading at the moment, I'm not impressed by his appearance, and that is shallow, yes, but really, he's not someone that I aspire to be like. David Cameron, yes, is white, but I think he's more polished, he's more professional, and that's the kind of aspiration that I have. And so therefore, the only time I think at the moment, if the policies are very similar as they are, the reason very similar as they are, in my opinion, why I would go back to Labour is if, so fortunately, if we had a black leader. What's his name? The guy.
Chucker.
When he was there, I started looking very closely at them and taking them more seriously. But then when he dropped out for some reason, I kind of.
But I think it comes back to that point again when I said about looking at the small politics. For me, if we're doing some of our research and work, who are the black politicians? Chucker isn't the only one.
And never was.
He never was. And so do you see what I'm saying about us understanding the politics? Because if we're saying that it's going to be reflective in terms of what we're looking at, we can't just go and look on the telly and go, right, there's Chucker. When I know Bernie Grant, all the rest, we've got a whole other set of politicians who've been campaigning very, very hard, representing us in our image where I see that. So,
it's important symbolically to have a representative parliament. When we are represented in parliament by our numbers, then race won't matter.
That's
then
right.
race can't matter. Yes. Then you have to look at the person and what they're offering. But until you get there, the routes into politics, or local politics at least, are not as obvious and as wide open as we would want them to be. There's a whole list of things, a whole list of challenges you have to go through. First of all, you have to say, I want to do it. And the second of all, you have to be accepted. And then third of all, you have to be really clear about what you're doing. And fourth of all, you have to be there at the right time, in the right space, with the right votes. It's not just I'm there. There's a whole backstory that I didn't realise there was a whole backstory before you get there at all.
No, I think again it comes back to that whole issue around representation. One of the things, and I have to say that certainly in Leicester, that I think our community did well, and again it is reflective in terms of us having a local councillor here, was the fact that for many years we only had one African Caribbean councillor. This year we've got 3 African Caribbean councillors. So when you start looking at that progress, it's not so much sometimes you as an individual want to go in, but who can we look around who's going to represent us? For me, for the first time, certainly the local authority, I can see, right, I know I can go to any one of those 3 African Caribbean councillors and raise any issues accordingly. You then transfer that much broader, and coming back to a point that you raised, if we look and say in terms of the national government, where we would want to do the same, and it comes back to some of the points that, Deborah has raised. How do we make sure that we have a broad understanding? Because, again, it's looking at what's happening locally and linking that nationally. The two are not separate, and so that's where we've got to make sure that we're developing, because that's where we come back into the politics. It's not a case of I might want to run for councillor, but who is representing me? And I think there goes, certainly where we maybe look at the African Caribbean community, they will turn, okay, then I've not gone, but we've got 3 councillors. That's much more than we had for years.
Well, I think in the past, what maybe have stopped people going forward, like you've said, we had one councillor. Now, who would want to put themselves in a position where they feel isolated, where they feel lonely? Because let's face it, we're sitting here, we're talking now, and we can nod, we can identify with each other. But if we go somewhere some of the times and you're the only person, you feel lonely, you feel isolation. And personally speaking, whilst I may be interested, I wouldn't like to go somewhere and represent where I cannot make a difference. But if I am going, I want to make a difference and represent. And if you've got a vote where you've got a number of 12 people, for example, and you're the only one, is your vote going to make a difference? No.
But this gentleman here, he said that he's a landlord. So he in certain times runs his own business. So therefore, like he said, he will vote on the party that he sees will make a contribution to what he's doing. And that's, for me, the way I see politics. And I think that in terms of the black community in Leicester, if the community was larger, because we've had this discussion before, Jerry, assets, in terms of owning assets, not taking assets from the council through transfers, actually owning assets. When you actually own things and you almost have built your own little system, much the same as the South Asian community in Leicester, then the voting becomes even more close to your heart. But just to vote because you're black doesn't make any sense to me.